Now, please welcome to the podium, President of the Greater Milwaukee Committee, Joel Brennan, to kick off today's discussion. Joel?
So I'm going to invite the ambassador to come as well. And I'm just going to start by saying we'll have a chance for Tom to introduce himself. This was supposed to be a triad conversation. So Joanne was supposed to get awarded with the Post of the Week last week, and then the three of us were going to have this conversation. But Joanne, in the last 24 or 48 hours, said something to Tom Barrett that he's been hearing for 40 years. You make me sick. So she's not... That's the one and only dig I'll make on you, Tom. So Joanne Anton's not able to join us today, but she helped put together some of the questions and the conversation we're going to have. And so I know most of you, and I've been in this community for a good number of years. Tom Barrett has represented this community in some fashion for about 40 years, about 10 years in the Wisconsin State Legislature, both in the Senate and the Assembly. Moved on to be a member of Congress for 5 terms, which is 10 years. Took about a year off and then became mayor and was mayor for 17 years here in Milwaukee. And then for the last 3 years served as ambassador. So if you're doing the math, that's 40 years of representation of this community. And just a little bit about my personal connection to Tom, it goes back even before that. I am the second youngest of 11 children. Tom went to high school with one of my older sisters and college. And so I've known Tom for 54 years, if you can do that math. One of my first memories with Tom is when I got Henry Aaron's autograph, and Tom was the one who was standing next to me when I got that. So that happened, I think his last year was 1976. So that was a few years ago for all of us. So, and I've worked with Tom throughout most of my career, and I can say that when I look at the people who I look up to and who have been mentors and friends to me in this community, Tom is at the head of that list, but I'm not the only person in this group who could say that. So that's my introduction to Ambassador Tom Barrett. And we're here mostly, Tom, today to talk about your experience in Luxembourg, this tiny country. I think it's 1,000 square miles, 645,000 people, not much bigger than the city of Milwaukee. I am sure for the last 15 or 20 years, you've been thinking about how could I become the ambassador to Luxembourg? So why don't we start with, how did you become the ambassador to Luxembourg? Just talk a little bit about the process for everybody, and welcome home.
Well, thank you very much, Joel. And Joel and I go way back again. He's very kind, and he's done a great job. So I want to appreciate what you've done. I also want to welcome the mayor and members of the Common Council and everybody else. Thank you for cleaning up all the mistakes that I made. I appreciate that very, very much. So I absolutely loved being the mayor of Milwaukee. It was really a thrill of a lifetime, and it remains the hardest job I ever had, but also the most rewarding job I ever had. But as George Harrison said, all things must pass. And having been mayor for over 17 years, close to 18 years, I felt that I had some gas left in my tank, and it would be exciting to have a new adventure. And truth be told, what really led to this was the work that I had done for the Democratic National Convention that basically did not take place in 2020 in Milwaukee. But I spent the better part of 2 years working to get the convention to come here. I had been to 6 Democratic conventions in my life and always thought, oh, it would be so cool to have a convention here in Milwaukee. So I worked with Tom Perez and others to get it here, and of course we got it. Then COVID hit. And about 6 weeks before the convention, they decided that it was going to be a virtual convention. And so they told the fellow who was in charge of the convention to tell me that they weren't coming. And he said, I'm not doing this, you do it. So Anita Dunn, who was the advisor to President Biden, came on what I describe as my Dear John Zoom call to say that there would be no real convention, notwithstanding all the work that I had done and everybody had done leading up to it. And when she was done with that, she had a good friend who happens to be a good friend of mine, and they were texting back and forth. And she said to my friend, oh, we really owe that guy. And my friend told me that, And I only had to hear that once. I didn't know what they owed me, but I wanted to collect. And I had been to a number of ambassadors' residences and embassies in my career, and I always thought it would be exciting. In many ways now, in retrospect, I'm a student of government. I was at the state level, the federal level, the local level, now the international level. And some people hate government. I actually find it challenging and rewarding. And I thought, well, that would be amazing to do that. But I had no idea how to become an ambassador. And so I adopted as my little theme song, or little theme in my mind, a song from the play Hamilton. And I thought, I have to find the room where it happens. If you know the play, you know the song, the room where it happens. And I had in my mind this vision that there would be some room where President Biden and his advisors would have a map, and they would have to assign different ambassadors to all these countries. I wanted to be in that discussion. So I started working with friends of mine from the administration. Senator Baldwin was very helpful. Ultimately, Congresswoman Moore, Congressman Kind were very, very helpful. Congressman Sherrod Brown, who was a good friend of mine from Congress, were helpful. But at the same time, with all due respect to my friends at the city and everywhere else, I couldn't say anything to anybody else because I'm well enough versed with politics to know the second the word got out I was looking for this, that the vultures would be surrounding. So I couldn't tell anybody. So we worked at it. And then I called Tom Loftus. Somebody mentioned Tom Loftus. Jeff had mentioned Tom Loftus. And I called him because he had been an ambassador to Norway. And I said, Tom, how do you do this? How do you do this? And he said, well, you just have to ask him. You just have to ask him. Ask who? Well, ask President Biden. And I'm thinking, it's COVID. Nobody's traveling. He's in Washington, D.C. Am I going to run into him at Walgreens? Where am I going to see Joe Biden? And so I'm thinking, okay, I don't know how this happens. Well, it was actually 4 years ago this week, because my wife just had one of those flashbacks come up on her Facebook, where several weeks after he was sworn in, there was an announcement. President Biden is going to make his first trip outside of Washington, D.C. as president. He's going to have a CNN town hall meeting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I thought, Eureka, this is it. Because as mayor, you greet him at the airport. Again, it's COVID. The only people there were the congressman, the county executive, and I, and our spouses. And I had worked with his staff to say, okay, I'm going to ask him. So he's coming down the red carpet toward me, and he says, Tom, it's great to see you. I really want to help you. What can I do? And I'm thinking, oh my God, somebody told him I'm about to ask him for this. And I said, well, Mr. President, I realize that you're going to have fewer political ambassadors than President Trump, but I still would be honored to serve you as an ambassador. And he goes like this, well, I still got a lot to give out. Where do you want to go? And I had told my wife, you stand behind me because I got to raise this and it could be embarrassing, what it could be. And so I had practiced this because I thought, okay, I don't want to ask for a country that his former next door neighbor is going to get. So I said, oh, Canada or Europe. And again, I'm playing politics at home because my wife had just retired or was about to retire, and she would not have wanted to go to a war-torn country. But she was willing, God bless her, to go to Europe. And so he said, well, I still got a lot to give out. And I said that. So then he turns to my wife, who's right behind me, and he says, this is a two-person job. Are you up for it? And my wife steps forward and she said, well, we've been married over 30 years. We've always been a team. Yes, I am. And that was the end of the conversation. So then a couple of months later, we get the call, do you want to go to Luxembourg? And I'm familiar with Luxembourg. Those of us in Wisconsin know there's a Luxembourg, Wisconsin. There's a Belgium, Wisconsin. There's a Brussels, Wisconsin, because a lot of people had come from there. But I immediately went to Wikipedia and I saw where the population, then it was 620,000. Actually, it's a growing country, one of the fastest growing countries in Europe. 620,000. And I thought, oh, a little over 600,000? Milwaukee's a little under 600,000? I can do this. And I said, we'd be honored to do it. So that's a long answer to your short question.
Yeah, I got like 17 other questions here, Tom.
But one of the challenges you're going to have is I don't have a job right now, and I'm not looking for a job right now. It's the first time I've worn a suit in a month. So I could, if this was beer, I'd sit here for 9 hours talking about this experience. So I'll let you ask your next question.
So I think everybody appreciated that as background. So you went to your I think it's announced in August. You get approved in December. You go in January. But in January, you had to go to ambassador school, right? With others, like you.
There was actually it was in October.
Okay.
It was in October. It's a 3-week school at the State Department, and for political ambassadors. So roughly, it depends on the president, but 60 to 70% of the ambassadors are career Foreign Service officers. 30 to 45%, depending on the president, are going to be political appointees. Obviously, I fall in the category of a political appointee.
Some of those are the really rich people too.
There are a lot of very, very wealthy people. In fact, when we had the class, there were 14 of us who were political, 15 who were career, and there was a little among the career people at the end of one of the days. They were talking, and the former ambassador to Israel said, "Well, there's a tradition for European ambassadors, American ambassadors to European countries, that they make a significant contribution to the residents. They remodel a bathroom, or they put in a new garden for the residents." And it took me about an eighth of a second to say, "I just want everyone here to know I will be breaking that tradition." My wife was a school teacher. I'm doing this. We did not fly in on our own plane. And I do remember a luncheon where the woman actually from the State Department were sitting there having lunch, and she said, "So did you bring your own chef with you from America?" So that just so we have a sense of what a lot of these ambassadors under both Democratic and Republican administrations are very, very wealthy. So I considered myself the ambassador for the middle class.
You are an ambassador of the people. So you get there, you present your credentials to the Grand Duke on February 10th of 2022, right?
And that's an important date, February 10th, 2022.
So 2 weeks later, February 24th, something globally significant happened.
Putin invades Ukraine 2 weeks
significance later. On the rest of your time,
right? And that was really the game changer. And I will say that prior to the invasion, there was literally disbelief that it was going to happen. And for me, as a political ambassador, I was very, very torn in the sense that I would receive these cables. They're actually emails, but they still call them cables, coming from Washington, D.C. And they're saying Putin is amassing troops along the border. They're about to invade. Please relay this news to your host government, to the prime minister, to the foreign minister, to the Duke, that they're about to invade. And so I'm doing this, and they don't believe me. And they really don't believe me for several reasons. One, over the past 20 years prior to that, there were some significant intelligence missteps, errors, misrepresentations, however you want to characterize them, coming out of America. And so our credibility was not as high as it should have been, quite honestly. So that was reason number one. Reason number two was we think here in the United States of Russia being way over there. It's over there in Luxembourg, but it's not way over there. And there are ties even between the royal family and people in Russia. There's a much more of a Russian presence there. So you don't have this natural animosity, if I want to use that word, that we might have here in the United States. And third, they thought it was crazy. They just thought it doesn't make any sense. And so I'm getting all this information from my new boss saying that Russia's about to invade Ukraine. And I'm telling it to my new customer, for lack of a better term, and they don't believe me. And I'm thinking, well, I sure hope I'm wrong, because this is really bad stuff. Well, of course, we all know what happened. And always looking for a silver lining to things. One of the silver linings is when President Biden was making statements, everything, and I mean everything that he said publicly happened. It was as though he were in a football stadium and he was in the announcer's booth, and he said, the Bears are about to run a screenplay to the left. And they did. And so everything, so instantaneously after it happened, I, as the ambassador, had credibility because now they wanted more information from the United States. And so again, whether I was meeting with the foreign minister or the prime minister, they were interested. They really were interested in what the United States said. So I want to say that and now tell you a little bit about the relationship, because this is important. I was amazed and shocked at how much this small country reveres the role that the United States played in literally saving the country 81 years ago, the Battle of the Bulge. Basically, the northern part of the country, small country, the northern part of the country was overrun by the Germans who were trying to go from Germany up to Antwerp, Belgium. And so they just plowed through. The Americans came and saved them. And it would give every person in this room goosebumps, potentially, to go through some of these small communities in northern Luxembourg and see these American flags and see how much they appreciate what they did. And I had, just to expand on that for a second, they have a military, Kevin Wester is here, who's taking groups. If you ever want to go to Luxembourg, with Kevin Wester to the American cemetery there. And I was there on a Memorial Day the first year, and I was talking to a TV reporter, and he asked me why I was there, and I said, because I think we have a duty, the American embassy, to not only remind the Luxembourg people, but the people in America of the incredible sacrifice. 19,000 Americans dying, the bloodiest battle for Americans in World War II, and it really, right there in Belgium and Luxembourg primarily, took place. And the TV reporter, who's maybe 45, 50 years old, starts crying, interviewing me about how grateful they are to the Americans. And I wanted to mention that because in the current state now, there is incredible concern about what the relationship is going to be between the United States and Europe. And there is more goodwill than you can imagine that we built up in that small country because of the actions we as Americans, and everybody in this room should be proud of what we did 80 years ago to fight for freedom and democracy. And they're concerned that this relationship is fraying.
Thank you. I mean, and just in anticipation of this and because of your connection, I did some other research on the Battle of the Bulge. Like 10% of our overall casualties in World War II came in that 6-week period.
Including my mother's first husband. And so this hit home for me very personally because my mother was a 23-year-old widow. She'd been married 6 months. And fortunately, she met my dad. So it really, to be honest, every year they have numerous Battle of the Bulge remembrances. And my staff, I think, was a little incredulous because I said, I want to go to as many as I can. I want
to. So that certainly shrouded, or that had an impact on all of your time there. When we were talking in preparation for this, you talked about a couple of other issues that you dealt with. One, and this in some ways has to do with some of that, but the requirement by NATO that countries are supposed to spend 2% of their GDP on defending, and they were well sure that part of because how rich the country is. But like maybe you want to just talk.
Sure. So that was, in terms of substantive issues, that was without a doubt the most substantive issue we had to deal with was NATO spending, defense spending. And ironically, as a member of Congress, I was never a big defense hawk. It's not a lot. I just wasn't. And now I'm in the position where I'm advocating for them to spend more on defense. This emanated from 2013, 2014. There was a pledge. This is when President Obama was in office, that all the NATO countries agreed that they would move toward, that was the phrase, 2% of gross domestic product spent on defense. By the time I got there, they were spending 0.74. They were dead last among the NATO countries in spending in defense. So this was the issue. And after President Obama made that pledge, they moved a little bit. President Trump came in for his first term, obviously much different rhetoric style. It moved a little bit. Under President Biden, it moved a little bit. And then Putin invaded Ukraine, and now it's going up. So Putin's invasion of Ukraine has more to do with the increase in spending than any president, Democrat or Republican, I believe, because now it's hitting home to them. Oh my God, we have a land war in Europe that we're afraid is going to spread. And so that's a real concern that they have. And they have really stepped up. They're not where they should be, but they've made significant progress. The other part of it, the most amazing thing that I say about Luxembourg, and Kevin might disagree with this, is that it exists because it's a small country, and for 1,100, 1,200 years, it's been a pinball where different countries want to take it over. The French, the Germans, the Austrians, the Spanish, the Netherlands, you name it, they want to take it over. And what I find amazing is some of these empires, they wanted to take them over, they don't exist anymore, and Luxembourg's still standing. So it's really a pretty remarkable story that this small country still exists.
So we've talked about heavy issues and things you had to deal with. Just give everybody here a sense of a day in the life. Like what was it like? The residents and the embassy were like connected, right?
Well, it was my commute was about 20 seconds, which was good and bad. I've had problems being on time throughout my entire life, and it was always because of traffic. No matter where it was always because of traffic. And my go-to excuse was gone. When you have a 25-foot walk, you can't say you got stuck in traffic. So it was located. But even the residents, there's a story there. This was the residence of the Gauleiter, I think is how you pronounce it in German, the person that Hitler put in charge after Germany invaded Luxembourg and made it part of Germany in 1940-41. Hitler installed a governor to run what they considered the province of Luxembourg then, and that person lived in the residence where I lived. So there was actually a spooky history to the residence where we lived. After the war, it reverted to Luxembourg. Luxembourg, in turn, sold it to Belgium. Belgium, in turn, basically gave it to us as part of what I believe their reparations under the Lend-Lease Act, if you remember that phrase from high school. And so it's been our residence since then. So it was right there. My wife, more so than any of my political jobs I've ever had, was part of it. This really was a two-person job because you have a lot more people at the house. One of our biggest memories was actually the first week where the residence had been empty for a year between the two ambassadors. And where she goes down the kitchen, there's all these tools in the kitchen, and she said, there's somebody in the house. There's somebody in the house. And they just would come into the house and do stuff. But we turned that around right away because it was our home. And I said, you have to look at it from their perspective. From their perspective, somebody's sleeping in the museum because it had been empty, because it's a very public setting. The whole first floor is a public setting.
Did you end up using those tools yourself?
I used them as much as I used tools in Milwaukee. So my day, it's a bureaucracy. I will say, again, with the staff, it's a small staff. Milwaukee has a great staff, many of whom are here. But I would tell the members of the embassy, in terms of the challenges, I would say, you don't understand. In my old job, I had people yelling at me in bars. This is much more chill than being a mayor of a city where, why didn't you get my snow plowed? Or why didn't you pick up my garbage? Or why didn't I get this grant? I mean, so it was significantly different in terms of the stress level. And in fact, the last week there was actually a pretty contentious issue we had as I was doing my exit interviews with the Grand Duke, with the Foreign Minister, with the Prime Minister. And the Foreign Minister one was actually quite lively. And my aide who was with me, we walked out, he said, oh, that was really, really rough. And I said, that's the kind of meeting I had every day in my old job. A very gritty, honest give and take, which I admire. So the niceties were gone because you had a real intellectual exchange of ideas, and you were talking. It wasn't just niceties.
You had, I recall you telling me that a huge number of your extended family and maybe people who wanted to feel like your family visited you while you were in Luxembourg. But like during the time you were there, Supreme Court justices, there was a papal visit, at least to the nation. Lots of people from Wisconsin. The Nancy Pelosi incident, which maybe you want to talk about, a little bit of Wisconsin and everybody coming to see you when you were there.
Well, so early on, my assistant at the time said, oh, Mr. Ambassador, ambassadors do not meet with people who are just traveling through. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but just so you know, if they're from Wisconsin, there's a really good chance I'm going to say yes. And I justified it because there's not a lot of interaction between the State Department and Wisconsin. And if you want people to support the State Department and what it does, then you have to pull back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz screen to people so they can see it, so they can see the work we do for passports, the work we do for public interaction, the work we do with the government. Because in essence, if you think about this, for an ambassador and for an embassy, there has to be a mechanism for one government to literally talk to another government. How does one government talk to the other government? A lot of us is through the media or through now Twitter or whatever, but that human connection, that's what an embassy does. And so we would get these cables, and we were told, and it wasn't always me. Frankly, it would only be me if it was really one that was pretty controversial or something. But our staff had a lot of interaction, direct interaction with the Foreign Service of Luxembourg, because you would be talking back and forth. And it wouldn't just be on our bilateral agreement, but it would be us going to them and saying, look, there's this vote coming up in the United Nations. We want you to be with us on this issue. There'd be other issues. But so that's a part of it. But Luxembourg has a unique spot, and you mentioned other visitors. We had staying at our residence in September the Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Kagan, and retired Justice Breyer. And they were there for a 3-day meeting with the European Court of Justice, which was located about a mile and a half from our residence. And so that was interesting and exciting to have them come there, and they wanted to stay at our house. And I'm like, why do you want to stay at our house? But there's no security concerns. And this is one of the other things that's different. I mean, it was very much a compound with the Marines guard the embassy. You've got people with guns that guard everything else. You've got obviously security for the ambassador and things like that. To the point where there was one day when it was right after the Supreme Court's decision in the Dobbs case having to do with reproductive rights. And so we actually had maybe 50, 75 demonstrators in front of the embassy. And they were all very, very concerned about this. And those of you who remember 2020 and all the demonstrations following George Floyd, we literally used to have at our home on the West Side hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in front of our home. And so they're thinking I'm concerned about this. And I'm thinking, look, you got 100 people there. You've got a fence. You've got guns. You've got all these people. Come back to me when there are 700 people and there is no fence. So I was not freaked out by that at all, but they were very concerned. And I understand that.
The mayor is here, and you were the mayor of a big city, and I think you had a chance to talk to people who ran Luxembourg City, and the area. Like, what would people here be surprised about or pleasantly surprised about?
So there's two things. First, let me just say to Mayor Johnson, one of the things I valued most about Mayor Norquist when he left was he moved to Chicago and he never meddled. And I thought that was really nice of him because it's a hard job. And to have your predecessor not there looking over your shoulder is really nice. And I thought, I am not going to second guess Chevy or do anything, undercut him. This is his time, I want him to do well. I think he's off to a great start. And I didn't want to meddle. So it made it easier for me to be gone because you have this tendency to want to second guess things, and it's not good for anybody. So that happened. But I did meet with the mayor of Luxembourg. Put this in context. Luxembourg's a city of about 130,000. And so I went to make my visit to her. And we're talking and just sitting like we're talking here. And she was talking about an environmental project she was working on for one of the rivers in the city. They had some flooding in the summer of 2021. And so I said, so do you have to incur a lot of debt for this? And she said, oh, we don't have any debt. And I'm thinking about my 15-year fight with the legislature to get more money when she's saying this. And I go back and tell the people in the embassy that, and they said, well, just to put another point on this, the city of Luxembourg has a surplus of over €1 billion. And I'm thinking there's not an American city that is sitting on a surplus of over $1 billion. That is why the trains, buses, the tram/streetcar are all free. That's why they have music lessons for the kids. That's why they have preschool. They have a child subsidy. This is a very wealthy country. And I just thought, oh my God. And the difference, and the policymakers here will understand this, there are no states in Luxembourg. There's the city and there's a state government. And Luxembourg has the second highest amount of what I would call private money management funds of any country in the world. Not per capita in raw euros or dollars. They are second only to the United States in private money market funds. There's a small tax levied by the city on this huge number that the city collects, and the city of Luxembourg shares it with the other communities. So the city is in the driver's seat in the shared revenue battle, as opposed to the government being in the. And so I actually asked several of the other mayors, thinking, okay, is the city of Luxembourg taking advantage of these other communities? And asked the mayors, just very diplomatically, because I was a diplomat, so they collect the money and share it. Is it a fair arrangement? And they said yes. So that was very instructive. So that was one. The other one is one that quite honestly breaks my heart. We had been there about 4 months, and there was a homicide. It occurred, again, about 2 miles from our home in the newer part of the city. And it was an after-hours robbery of a restaurant, and a worker was killed. And so I'm still mentally thinking like a mayor. And so I'm asking all these questions. Okay, what happened? What happened? And they tell me what happened. Again, this is the April, May of 2022. And they said, yeah, this is the first one we've had since 2020. First homicide in 2 years. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart.
All right, we're going to ask questions from the audience. Just one thing in the spirit of Jed Bartlett, give me like 30 seconds of what's next.
Well, as I said, this is halftime. I have no idea what's next. I have nothing planned right now. This is the first time I put a tie on.
Halftime? Does that mean you're going to be one of these people who lives till 140 and
that's the plan.
Social Security we're hearing about?
Yeah. So I'm very happy. I'm very relaxed. I don't know. My wife would like me to be retired, but I think in 3 weeks, I think she will be showing me want ads to get me out of the house. So I don't know where things are right now.
You do. You have a grandchild who's in Denver.
In Denver,
so
our
he's
first
spending
grandchild.
A little time there.
Yeah.
So I think Kent's got the mic, and we're gonna have people ask some questions.
All right, Tom, you're first.
Welcome back, Tom. Good to see you again. Did you have many black tie events catered with everybody dressed to the nines?
There were some, not as many as my wife thought. In fact, she bought a couple of dresses that she didn't have to use. A lot of business dresses. Each year there would be at the Grand Duke Palace, the Ducal Palace, there would be an event where I have a tuxedo that I've had for 20 years, but I still would have to rent a morning suit or an afternoon suit or something. So you would have to do some of those. It's not as much as a caricature would have you believe, but it's more than I wanted. How's that for that?
Well, I have a question for you. Who was in charge of the diplomatic responsibilities during that 1 year period, between when your predecessor left and when you?
So in every embassy, and this is, I think, particularly relevant for countries where there's a political ambassador, because they would never say it, but I think this is very, very true, that when the political ambassadors come in, there has to be, the career people are suspect of us, because they've spent their whole career in the diplomatic service. And all of a sudden, you've got this person from the outside coming in, and there might even be resentment. I'm sure there is in some quarters, because almost all, not all, almost all the other ambassadors, I'm saying the ambassadors from France or Switzerland or you name it, they're career people. So in the diplomatic corps, and Luxembourg's a small country, in the diplomatic corps, most of them are what I would call professionals. So they were very, very concerned at the outset with me. I think what helped me tremendously was I came from government. And so I understand, in fact, I'd worked for the federal government, but the city government. I understand government. So this was not my first rodeo in government. But I will say, so the number two person, who is in essence the chief operating officer, that's the career person. And that's a person, again, who is more likely to make or break someone's career than the political ambassador. Because not shockingly, for both parties, you're going to have some political ambassadors that are real divas or don't understand it or just want to have the parties all the time. And it's a working bureaucracy. And so that's part of it. So it's gaining the trust of the people who work there. That's a big part of my job, is gaining their trust.
Thank you so much for your service here and abroad. My question is, you knew that for you and Chris, this was a limited term engagement, and you're living in Europe. What place did you travel to that was the most surprisingly delightful location?
Well, so I've had lots of friends who traveled, and some of whom in their lives, and we were never big travelers at all because we raised 4 kids. 10 years I was in DC, and I never took a Codell, which the people at the embassy were surprised at, because we had 4 babies, and that just wouldn't have worked. And so we got a chance to go to many places that were not on our bucket list because we did not have a bucket list. But keep in mind, again, if you look at the map, we rode our bikes all the way to France, 12 miles. We rode our bikes all the way to Belgium, 12 miles. We did not ride our bikes all the way to Germany, 24 miles. So it is amazing that you've got, its location is really great. And when you're living there, you have a much greater appreciation. Going from Luxembourg to Switzerland is like going from Milwaukee to St. Louis. It's not at all. So we got a chance, and we would use as many 3-day weekends as we could to go. So we traveled a lot throughout Europe. We also went to Egypt, we went to Turkey. Morocco, I would say it was our favorite one. We spent 9 days in Morocco. And before I got to Morocco, all I knew about Morocco was Marrakesh Express, the song, and the film Casablanca. And so we spent there. And because it was more of a different cultural event, but we went to many, many, many countries. I haven't sat down to count them because I don't want to get too obsessed. But my wife did tease me. I remember in particular we were going to Krakow, Poland, and Warsaw. And I said, well, let's just go down into Slovakia. Let's just go down to Slovakia. And she said, you just want to go there to check it off. And I said, that's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And so she came back and she said, well, if we're going to do something, why don't we go to Budapest in Hungary instead? And I said, all right, you win. We'll go to Budapest instead. So again, we got a chance to go to all the Baltic countries. It was, as I said, again, say to my friends who travel a lot, look, you did it in your 20s. I did it in my 60s. It was a great opportunity as far as that goes.
Is there anything you can share about Speaker Pelosi's visit?
So, yes. So again, the Battle of the Bulge 80th anniversary, big deal. I think 19 members of Congress came, 5 senators came, the head of NASA came, and we were invited to the palace. And while we're at the palace with the Grand Duke and, sort of the meet and greet, that we come down the staircase, and I was on the right side, she was on the left side. And all of a sudden I noticed this commotion, and I see she is the one that's on the floor. 1 minute later, there's a picture that was on the front page of the New York Times where she's standing, and we're all standing. And that picture was taken after she fell. And so it was amazing that she was able to grit up and do that. So then the rest of us were going to go to Bastogne for the Battle of the Bulge Memorial. That was really the epicenter for the American resistance, for an event at the museum there. And so we went there, and we're coming back, and I'm talking to my staff, and we have a staff person at the hospital. And I served with her in Congress, so I know her. And again, we have somebody there sort of monitoring things. And I said, check with her, see if she would like me to stop by. This is like 5 or 6 at night as we're driving past. And my staff gets back to me, and they said, no, she doesn't. And I said, okay, fine. I wanted to respect her privacy. But then I thought, oh, I don't want to be perceived as missing in action, so I'll just stop at the hospital and I'll just write her a note, just so I could say that I had been there. And so we get to the hospital, and my assistant is there, and she walks me back to the wing where Nancy's in a room, and Nancy's assistant comes out, and she says, "Oh, you can walk right in," to my wife and me. And we walked in, and she was lying in her bed, dressed like she could go to a supper club, looked amazingly good, and talked for 45 minutes, and was in great spirits. And then an hour later, they airlifted her to Germany to have the hip surgery done. So I think what happened, actually, knowing Nancy, was they said, "Oh, the ambassador wants to stop by," and she said, "Oh, he doesn't have to do that." But on the other hand, I'm thinking, if you're lying in a hospital bed 6,000 miles from home, it would be nice to have somebody you know. So it was a wonderful visit, but she's obviously very, very full of life. And I remember her saying something along the lines, "I gave birth to 5 children. This is nothing compared to that." So that was...
I'm with the Honorary Consulate of Luxembourg in Wisconsin, and I know it's not time for commentary, but I have experienced 5 ambassadors from the U.S. to Luxembourg, and Tom Barrett ranks on the top. He made Milwaukee proud, and I know I read the news in Luxembourg on a daily basis. People were very, very sad to lose him. He was an ambassador out there with the people. He got out of the fortress and was with the people. The people of Luxembourg now know Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I commend Tom for that. It would also be interesting, Ambassador, it's such a small country, but share with them about the command of language and the diversity of that small country.
So by far, the most humbling part is, and the story I'll tell is, we had been there maybe 5 weeks, and we wanted to take the train to Paris, which is just a 2-hour train ride. We couldn't figure out how to do it online, so we went down to the Gare, to the train station, and there's a fellow at the window, and he's helping us, and he's apologizing. He's speaking in, from my standpoint, perfect English. And he says, "I'm sorry, my English isn't that good." I said, "Your English is very good. How many languages do you speak?" 5. And Kevin can attest to this. This is not exaggeration. In Luxembourg City in particular, 4 languages. 4 languages. Luxembourgish at home before you go to school, French when you start going to school, German when you get to middle school, English when you get to high school and or through social media. And then the largest, which one might call minority group, outside group, are the Portuguese. So a lot of people speak Portuguese. So it is incredibly humbling, incredibly humbling. The city, again, of Luxembourg, 73% of the people are not from Luxembourg. When people ask me about Luxembourg culture, I say it's in essence European culture, because it's from all over Europe. The European diversity is immense. Now, I say that because I think in Milwaukee, with African Americans, with European whites, with Hispanics, I think our diversity is as pronounced, if not more pronounced. There you have lots of language diversity and European diversity. And I think it's obviously something, you went to the School of Languages, you benefited by learning languages, something as Americans I think we're missing the boat on. But the flip side of that is, again, the European Court of Justice is there. And I was invited to hear the oral arguments in the European Court of Justice about a case involving the New York Times and trying to get freedom of information during COVID. And I went there, and the courtroom was packed. And in the courtroom there, I'm going to guess 14, maybe 16 booths on the side for simultaneous translation, because there are 22 languages in the European Union. And so you have to have instantaneous translation. And in fact, the European Court of Justice has close to 2,500 people working there. A significant number of those are linguist attorneys who have to translate into all these different languages. So as defensive as I felt, and as humbled as I felt that we know only one language here, that was when I thought, okay, as cool as this is to have all these languages, we have an incredible competitive advantage in the United States where we speak English and we don't have to translate things into 22 languages. So I think again, culturally, would I like us to speak more language? Of course. Personally, would I like to? Of course. But I think that shows you how economically the United States benefits because we don't have to spend money on it.
Okay, last question, Fred.
So you addressed that Americans are thanked for what we've done in the past. The question is, are we going to be welcome in Europe in the future in the New World Order? And also, how secure do small countries like Luxembourg feel in the New World Order now that we know that countries like Panama, Greenland, and Canada are in play? How do the European countries feel about their stability?
Well, I will tell you what I said the morning. So one of the traditions at American embassies is they always have an election night party every 4 years to celebrate democracy in America. There's a 7-hour time delay, so we had a breakfast. We had a breakfast, which made sense. And a lot of times they have them. The question was about getting dressed up. One of my staff people said we should have it in a sports bar because you have all these TVs. I said I like that vibe a lot more. Let's have the breakfast in the sports bar. It was actually cheaper to do it there. So we went to a sports bar for the breakfast, and of course the results were coming in. And so I had to diplomatically and professionally make a statement. And what I said then, and I believe this, is I said, I don't think that there's a major concern about the bilateral relationship between the United States and Luxembourg. And the reason I'm not concerned is because our relationship is built on these 3 incredibly strong pillars. The first pillar being what happened in World War II and our relationship to them during World War II. The second pillar is the incredible American investment there and the Luxembourg investment in the United States. The economic ties are extremely strong. And the third is the values. The values are very similar. So I do think that the bilateral relationship will remain strong. But as I said then, and as I'll say now, I can't say the same thing about the relationship between the United States and the European Union, and I can't say the same thing about the United States and NATO. And when I say that, again, this was November 6th, I said, I cannot say it's going to be terrible. I can't say it's going to be great. I just don't know. I just don't know. But I think you could see from the Munich Security Conference and the comments that the vice president made there, some of the comments that the president's made, that there is very, very strong concern in Europe about what our relationship, the United States relationship, which has been so strong for 80 years and longer, what's going to happen going forward. And so that's why I mentioned that those flags in the northern part of the country, because as an American, I was so proud of the role we played there. It really gave me the goosebumps to see, God, we really saved these people. And now there is real concern there as to what the relationship will be. So I don't think anybody here can predict what it's going to be. I think we're witnessing in real time the writing of a history book as to what the relationship is going to be between the United States and Europe and the United States and other countries.
Okay, Ambassador, thanks so much.